AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor here with you on this morning program, the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM, and 'tis the season to celebrate whatever holiday it is that you celebrate in the month of December. And for those who are disenchanted with the commercial aspects of Christmas, there's always a Festivus for the rest of us, the holiday parodied and popularized because of a single episode of Seinfeld which aired during the mid-90s and has since taken on a life of its own. And here to discuss it is the man who wrote the book on Festivus, Festivus, the holiday for the rest of us. It's Mr. Alan Salkin. Alan, thank you so much for joining me here on this program.
Happy Festivus, Peter. If you want it to be happy. If you want it to be miserable, then miserable Festivus, Peter.
Well, right now I'm happy, but we'll air our grievances a little later on.
Okay.
Let's talk about the holiday Festivus in that it essentially started out as a parody of one of the writers of Seinfeld's family's holiday traditions growing up and is now taken on a life of its own, so much so that I don't know if you've heard this yet. In the Capitol building in Florida, there is actually a Festivus pole erected for those who do not celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah.
Well, it's interesting you use the word erect. It's always a danger, and they should know this in Florida, that whenever you erect a Festivus pole, you are in danger of attracting strippers. So that's a real crisis. I am aware of that.
Especially with the warm weather there, they're not wearing much to begin with.
Exactly. That's why we should all be going down there this time of year. But as the guy that wrote the book on Festivus, I do know about that because people start throwing it up on my Facebook page, and I'm like cursed with being the Festivus guy, I think, for the rest of my life.
Well, the guy who wrote the original episode of Seinfeld would probably disagree with you. He would probably say that he's more cursed with being the Festivus guy than you. Let's talk about him a little bit. The guy who wrote the episode, which was titled The Strike, which was about Kramer going on strike from his job at I believe a deli or a bagel company. He went on strike, and the reason why he ultimately went on strike towards the end of the episode was because they did not let him take off the holiday of Festivus, which was a festival, of course, they had never heard of. This was based on a real story, or the holiday was at least.
Yes. So there was a guy named Daniel O'Keefe, who was a kind of scholar and a Reader's Digest editor who lived north of New York City, and he wrote a book about ancient rituals called Stolen Magic, and this goes back to ancient Roman times. I'm not kidding. This is all true what I'm saying, and there's actually a Latin word that was used in Rome called Festivus, and it referred to the way the common people would misbehave on holidays, and it was basically a sort of an alternative to the official way you were supposed to celebrate a holiday. This was sort of the will and mass consciousness of the people being manifested. So if you think about Mardi Gras, Festivus-like behavior was like Mardi Gras-like behavior in ancient Rome. So this guy created a Festivus holiday for his family in upstate New York. Well, not quite upstate, but middle of the state New York. And he called it Festivus, and they could actually have it any time of year whenever he felt grievances needed to be aired from the family. So they would air grievances into a tape recorder, and the kids would sometimes wrestle. That guy's son, Daniel O'Keefe's son, Dan O'Keefe, became a writer for Seinfeld. Now, this was on the final season of Seinfeld when Larry David had already left the show. He came back to write the final episode, and there were other writers working on it. Dan O'Keefe mentioned this holiday around the writer's room, and they said, we got to get that into an episode. So that is how it ended up on Seinfeld. For the show, they added the Festivus pole, which is not in the original O'Keefe holiday. And also the point that Dan O'Keefe would disagree with me is probably true, because I think he hated so much that I wrote a book about it that he has not been in contact with me since, and actually wrote his own alternative book, which was transcripts from the family cassette tapes from the 70s.
Now, I am a big Seinfeld fan.
Is that just too much info?
That's not too much info. I'm a big. If you go on YouTube, I did the most in-depth interview in the history of interviews with the Soup Nazi. So if I can talk Seinfeld with anybody, I'll talk Seinfeld for hours. Now, I remember watching the DVD of Seinfeld with the commentary on, and Daniel O'Keefe actually provided the commentary for that particular episode, and you could tell that he was doing it almost reluctantly. I think that deep down ingrained in him, he still cringes at the thought of the word Festivus because it was such an embarrassment to him in his upbringing growing up.
I'm not so sure. I think that could be the truth, because that's also how George Costanza is portrayed on the show, as sort of hating it. It's also, I think, the case that Dan O'Keefe is a bit of a jerk. which I think you can see on that thing. And he also, if you watch that DVD, he used way too much gel in his hair.
I had not noticed. So, what's been your relationship with the man who wrote the Festivus episode, Dan O'Keefe, as you just called him a jerk?
Well, basically, what happened was I was spending some time in Ohio, and my then girlfriend told me she was going to a party, a Festivus party, and I was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" From Seinfeld, and then 2 days later, I realized this could be an article for the newspaper because I was writing pieces for the New York Times, and so I wrote a piece for the Times, which was about how people in the real world all over the country were celebrating Festivus based on the rituals they had learned from Seinfeld. At that time, the elder Daniel O'Keefe, I got on the phone to do an interview, and I also had some contact with Dan O'Keefe, and they gave me, nice little interviews, and they were, a little reluctant and a little weird about it, but they did it. The article was so popular, the most emailed on the New York Times, that I decided this was worth a little book, a quick, funny book that I could do about sort of chronicling the rituals in the real world. When I contacted Dan O'Keefe, the younger, he basically responded with nothing but hostility. I got a letter from a lawyer telling me that, something about, they owned the rights to the word, which of course they don't because you can't own a title, and it's an ancient Latin word, et cetera, et cetera. And the next thing I knew, my book sold quite well, but there was this rival book that came out exactly the same time as mine from him that probably took, a good third of my sales away because people got confused on Amazon about which book was good and which book was crap.
So your book is Festivus, The Holiday for the Rest of Us. It still is available on stores like Amazon.com, I'm assuming.
It's an ebook now. It's hard. You can still buy some used copies. There's a lot of interest, actually. These guys that make Festivus poles in Wisconsin have been selling Festivus pole kits that include my book for years, and they've actually run out of their supply. And so we're trying to figure out if it's possible to print more copies.
So did they know that you were interviewing them with the idea of one day writing a book, or at the time you were just looking to do the article for the Times?
It's a good question. Probably, to be totally honest, they probably only thought they were speaking to me for the newspaper article.
But the article
I called. The reason I called it, you're really getting into the controversy here. The reason I called Dan was to suggest that we work together because I figured I had all this interest and we could put out a really good book together. And honestly, I hope someday that there can be a rapprochement between me and the O'Keefes.
And the truth of the matter is, we had actually done some searching to reach out to him and have him on the program, but we simply just could not find his contact info.
He's not easy to find. I have a website, festivusbook.com. It's easy to find me. I'm all over the internet. I'm a journalist. I'm happy to do interviews, and he has given a couple interviews over the years about it. There was one on CNN probably 5 years ago, and he did the DVD commentary, which I wish they had called me about too, but yeah, he's hard to reach. He's, as far as I know, Dan is a very successful screenwriter and scriptwriter, TV writer in L.A.
Well, once again, we're chatting with Alan Salkin, author of Festivus, The Holiday for the Rest of Us, here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Let's get back to the actual holiday itself. At the top of the interview, you mentioned some of the differences and similarities between the real holiday of Festivus in its origins and what was portrayed on the episode of Seinfeld. You mentioned that there legitimately was a feats of strengths aspect to the original Festivus, as the children in the household would wrestle. There legitimately was airing of the grievances, apparently some of which is recorded because Dan Keefe has some of the recordings.
His book is called The Real Festivus.
And he actually has recordings of the actual airings of the grievances from when he was a child.
Yes.
So that's a real aspect of...
And by the way,
yes?
I'm not as much of maybe of an aggressive jerk as I sound right now. I'd like to get in the spirit of Festivus and just sort of tell it like it is.
Well, air your grievances, my friend. That's what we're here for.
I'm airing my grievances against the O'Keefes. I want to be friends with them, and they won't let me.
I don't know if they'd appreciate the remark about the gel in the hair, though.
Well, I actually wrote that in that there was an updated version of the book, and I pointed that out in the book in a really small little note that Dan's hair was over gelled.
Well, I guess that's, all in the eye of the beholder. That's a very subjective thing.
You go back and watch with an eye to the gel, and I think you'll see what I see.
I'm going to pull this up. The DVD extras, I think, are all on YouTube at this point. I'm going to find it, and we'll let you know after the break. Once again, we're chatting with Alan Salkin. What other aspects of the original Festivus made its way into the episode, and what else was fabricated from the episode that was not a part of the original holiday?
Well, an important thing was for the O'Keefes, this was something that would arise out of the sort of subconscious of the family, and the father would, Dan O'Keefe the elder, would say, okay, I think it's beginning to look like we need a Festivus, and just decide this was time to let the grievances air. There was also, for the family, there was a sort of mysterious bag and a clock, which nobody has ever explained exactly what that was about. For Seinfeld, they basically turned it into an alternative December holiday, which is why you get that thing where Kramer wants the holiday off, and what I call the Seinfeld orthodoxy, the kind of new popular understanding of the holiday. According to the Seinfeld orthodoxy, the holiday is on December 23rd. Now, as I point out in the book, most people by December 23rd are already back home with the people they don't want to be with, namely their families. So oftentimes Festivus is, despite the Seinfeld orthodoxy, celebrated in early December because it's this perfect non-denominational holiday. Also, the Festivus feast, as you see on Seinfeld, is a bit of an invention, in a sort of simplification. I think they were the foods in the O'Keefe house weren't always so specific as what people have taken by what they saw served on Seinfeld, which looks like a bad lasagna.
Well, once again,
remember that the Costanzas on Seinfeld were not supposed to be Jewish; they were supposed to be Italian.
And that show was very Jewish. So I almost think everyone's Jewish on that show as you go back.
Well, they are,
watch
but
it.
It's never said.
It's never said. What about Festivus has really permeated pop culture since this episode aired? Because when did this episode air? It was mid to late 90s. We're going on 15 years now.
I want to say 99. It was in the last season of the show.
So we're going on 15 years ago this episode aired, and it's still a part of the fabric of pop culture in the United States today. A lot of things from Seinfeld have had their run in pop culture, but this is one that seemingly will be around almost forever.
Well, that's a question, and I noticed that over the last couple of years, had been getting a few less phone calls about it, and also the book, the sales have sort of tailed off. But and actually, if the sales had gone below a certain level, I was due to get the rights back to the book from the publisher, and I was hoping that would happen so I could market it myself. But the sales were incredibly strong last year. We sold about. I got a royalty check for a few $1,000s because of ebook sales. So that tells me either ebooks are incredibly popular or something about Festivus is sort of catching fire again.
Let's talk about two things here because you wrote the book on Festivus. You're also an author of many other books outside of Festivus. I think that can be attributed to the fact that while bookstores physically are diminishing, it's not that people are reading any less. People are just reading in a different way due to the way that books are read now with the advent of technology. And perhaps just syndication and cable reruns of Seinfeld have only gotten stronger since the show went off the air.
I don't know. You have to check that. I feel like in New York, Seinfeld isn't hammered on people as much as it was every night. And my new book is called From Scratch: Inside the Food Network. It's a history of the cable television channel. It's a much more deep work of journalism than Festivus. But I was just meeting with my publisher today. The book's been out a couple months, and it's selling one ebook for every hardcover copy. And while the ebook is a little cheaper, I just think that's a pretty surprising equation. It's really doing well as an ebook.
And do you think that ebooks is either the way of getting books in the future or perhaps the now, in that eventually we'll see even less physical bookstores than we see now? They're going bye-bye left and right.
Yes, I've been touring a lot of bookstores, and I think that they're basically in the business of selling children's books now. That's the only people who seem to want to consistently come. Parents like to bring their kids, do a little story time there. There's still some great bookstores around the country, no question, and I think there will continue to be. But I don't see as long as there's a print copy archived somewhere in the libraries of the world, just in case some electromagnetic pulse, wipes out all of our electronic memory. As long as there's some physical archive, I don't see what the harm is in reading. Who cares that you read a book? I have this Kindle Paperwhite is a great device. You can read in bed and not bother the person next to you. It's awesome. Or the people next to you, because sometimes there's more than one in bed, of course.
Either right now or in the long run, is it better for writers such as yourself that ebooks exist, or do you like the old days of people going to the store and getting the hard copy?
Better. I mean, look, I'm making a living as a writer. I'm happy about that. I can just, I ride the waves as they come. I can't set the set in the ocean and with my surfboard out there. And so this writer is just surfing the waves as they are. It's frustrating sometimes that I can't sign people's Kindle if they want an autograph on the book. There's definitely, some adjustments to be made and some things to be thought about, but I love it. When people are reading Kindles on the subway or whatever, who cares?
And you mentioned a few moments ago that you had gotten fewer and fewer calls over the years in relation to this Festivus book, but that seems to have gone up just a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you ever get sick about talking about Festivus each and every December, or is it the gift that keeps on giving?
Last year, I basically turned down everybody, and I didn't do any. I felt like, actually, I wanted to suppress the sales of the book. I was hoping people wouldn't buy the book because I wanted the publisher to not sell copies, so I would get the rights back in case I ever, want to do something with them. So I don't know. I love being interviewed. I love, in a way, it's like a tradition for me. I get to put on this sort of gripey character hat of the Festivus guy every year and talk about it. So I'm getting used to it. It's my lot, I think.
Well, we thank you for doing this interview with us, even though it may have an adverse effect on you getting the rights to your book back from the publisher.
Yeah, my site is festivusbook.com, and I really would love people to buy my new book, From Scratch Inside the Food Network. There's a great New York Times review coming out this Sunday about it, which is really raves. It's a little capsule review, but it's very positive, and I'm happy about that.
Let's talk about that real quick. Your book is From Scratch Inside the Food Network. We're chatting with Alan Salkin here on WXBR. What's the synopsis of From Scratch Inside the Food Network, and who would be interested in this particular book?
Well, anybody who loves or hates the network, who wonders why this thing, which they used to love because it had great cooking instruction, has become a carnival of competition shows and chaos. It really tells this great American success story about a network that started 20 years ago in Rhode Island and eventually New York, and on nothing, and nobody believed was a good idea. Everybody thought, what was coming out of Boston with Julia Child and those shows was enough on PBS, and a bunch of crazy people took a chance, lost money for years, and so the book tells the story of the rise of this thing into what it is now, this, multi-billion-dollar cultural and media behemoth with all kinds of, backstory about your favorite stars and how they got there and their roles that they played, and how women bared their breasts to Emerald, and Guy Fieri, was obsessed with Evel Knievel and Elvis as a kid, and all kinds of stuff about Rachel Ray and Giada De Laurentiis, and so it's all the way up to now when you see in the news today that Discovery Networks is considering buying the parent company of Food Network in what could be an even more lucrative deal than we can imagine.
I would be interested in some salacious Rachel Ray stories, just to let you know.
Well, people always ask me about how her marriage is, because like 8 years ago there was an article in the National Enquirer about their marriage being on the rocks, but they're actually quite close. The stories about Rachel, there is a story in the book about her and Mario Batali being in a strip club and doing shots with Mark Summers, the guy from Double Dare.
Wow, I'm sure that was quite messy, but continue.
If you do want to picture Mario and Rachel and Mark Summers in a strip club in Cleveland one late night under the train tracks, you can buy my book.
All right. Well, that is From Scratch Inside the Food Network, available now in bookstores and Amazon.com by Alan Salkin, who's our guest right now. Alan, before I let you go, let's go through some of the motions of Festivus. I think we've already aired some grievances, but is there anything else that we have not got to yet in relation to the airings of grievances that you would like to get to?
Well, my main grievance this year is about noise in restaurants. I like to have conversations around food with people. I think good food makes people want to talk and open up. And when I go to these restaurants and they're all trying to have the loudest possible music playing, and they all have like hard floors and hard walls and hard ceilings because they think that people will associate noise and buzz with good food, it drives me nuts. I can't stand having to shout over our salads and have to talk directly into people's ears. It drives me nuts. And if I could change one thing in the world besides the obvious things of like hunger and poverty and war and all that stuff, one stupid, silly thing I would change is noise in restaurants. Make it quieter, people.
It's a good thing we're doing this interview over the phone because otherwise we would have to get to the next portion of Festivus, which would be the feats of strength, and you and I would have to grapple. But we'll refrain from that due to the restraints of telephone-to-telephone conversation.
I'm happy to hear that.
All right. Well, that's Alan Salkin joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. And perhaps if you and the O'Keefe family get together and mellow out a little bit, that would be a Festivus miracle.
It would be. I hope it happens.
That's Alan Salkin joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. He wrote the book Festivus, The Holiday for the Rest of Us. Also wrote From Scratch, Inside the Food Network. Some big reviews coming out about that book fairly soon. And Alan, my broadcast partner, Mike Pev, is a huge Food Network fan, so I think that we'll have to have you back on the program, interviewed by him in relation to the Food Network. How's that sound?
Anytime. I'm glad to be here. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
That's Alan Salkin joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We'll step aside for a quick break. When we return, we'll do a local news update.